Welcome to the B Block Podcast, a Foolish Club media production. I am your host, Brandon Scott, and I appreciate you for being here. We're going to get right into the show. Got a couple of things I want to go over with y'all, man. We're going to talk about the NBA draft. There's a lot to go over, man, from the draft itself to the whole production of it. I don't like to do like heavy media criticisms. I don't like to be that guy because I am in media, and it's just, I don't know, since I'm not a professional media critic and am in the business myself, I don't like to really dive into those waters, but I think that it might come up in this show a time or two. So we're going to do NBA draft. We're going to talk about Fred VanVleet signing his, or is at least agreeing to sign his 2-year extension, as opposed to the team picking up his team option. They're going to sign him to a 2-year extension. And we'll also talk about the Texans announcing their training camp dates and times and public availabilities. We'll get into all of that on the show today, but I want to start with the draft since that's the most recent thing that happened, and really just start by saying this, man. I am a fan when it comes to this draft, at least when we're talking about the top end of this 2025 NBA draft class. I am a big fan. There was a little air taken out of the room for me with the Rockets not having a pick at all. But because I was such a big fan at the top end of this draft, or what the top end of this draft represented, I was really into this one to the point where I didn't think about it until after the picks came in, or as the picks were coming in. But I did realize that I would have taken the first 6 players who went in this draft. I would have taken them over anyone that went in last year's draft, especially if I don't have the benefit of hindsight. I think that Stephon Castle now has probably played himself into the conversation with some of these guys, a couple of these guys that I'm talking about. But if I go 1 through 6, each of these guys for me would have gone number 1 overall for me last year, would have been the number 1 overall pick for me last year. And I don't hate last year's class per se. I know it's real popular to talk about how weak of a class that it was, and I do agree with that in large part, but I don't necessarily hate the class as much as I just really like this one. So I think every one of these guys is just, to me, the way I would describe it is just like all of them, all 6 of these guys, 1 through 6, certainly 1 through 5, but I think 1 through 6, when we go through it, every one of these guys is such a clear and obvious NBA player, right? So from Cooper Flag going number 1 overall, Dylan Harper going number 2, VJ Edgecombe going, the kid from Baylor, from the Bahamas, going number 3 overall to the Philadelphia 76ers. Con Knuppel going number 4 to Charlotte. Ace Bailey number 5 to the Utah Jazz, and Trey Johnson number 6 going to the Washington Wizards. Each and every one of these guys, to me, is such a clear and obvious NBA player that I would have taken them over anybody that went in last year's draft. And that's no disrespect to the guys that went in last year's draft. And again, Stephon Castle, I think, has played his way into the conversation with some of these guys, I think, in terms of like an NBA prospect. And Reed Shepherd didn't necessarily, didn't always have the chances and the opportunities, but I think he's somewhere around these guys too, in terms of just being a clear and obvious NBA player, just because of what his exact skill set is. But all of these guys, to me, would have gone over, for me, if I were in charge, would have gone over Zachary Risachet or Alex Sarr and Reed Shepherd, Stephon Castle, Ron Hall, like all of these guys I would have taken over. I would have taken Cooper Flag number 1, obviously, in last year's draft. Dylan Harper would have been the number 1 overall pick for me in last year's draft. VJ Edgecombe, Con Knuppel, Ace Bailey, who was the surprise. I feel like this was the first, it got interesting at number 3 because it wasn't obvious who they would go with, right? Like Cooper Flag, clear number 1. Dylan Harper, I think everybody had accepted that he was going to be the number 2 overall pick. But I think there was a feeling that Ace Bailey after that was probably the best prospect because of his size, because of his obvious scoring ability. Con Canipula is, clearly a more well-rounded overall, like higher floor type of player. VJ Edgecombe to me is the best athlete in the draft, but he's a smaller guy, right? And Ace Bailey is, does not lack for athleticism. Like it seemed like that would have been potentially the pick there, but you talk about fit, what makes the most sense. Maybe VJ Edgecombe makes the most sense for what Philly's trying to do. But that's where it got really interesting. But again, all of these guys, and I can even get down to Trey Johnson, man. The only reason, and I mentioned this, his ridiculous draft outfit aside, and if y'all haven't seen that, y'all just got to go look that up if you weren't watching or didn't even see it on social media, man. I don't understand the kids and what they're, like how they dress these days, but it's not for me to understand. That was my thing. It's just not for me to understand. But what I did understand was him being really the only thing that made Texas basketball worth watching this past year. The only reason to watch. And it was because they had such a clear and obvious NBA talent out there playing. So I'm a fan. I gotta start there, man. I'm a fan of these prospects. And again, I want to point this out. Like, I'm not like these guys to me. Again, I mentioned they're such clear and obvious NBA players, clear and obvious NBA talents. These guys are going to play a lot of NBA minutes on teams, whether it's as stars or as role players. Like it's not me here predicting stardom for these guys, but clear as day NBA talents is what we're talking about here. Now, the local angle that I would mention is how excited I feel like NBA fans in Texas should be after this draft. Even though you knew it was going to happen, I think the fact that the number 10 overall pick for the Rockets ended up turning into Kevin Durant, right? Like they used that pick to go with Jalen Green and Dylan Brooks and all of those second round picks to go get Kevin Durant. So effectively, I mean, the way I was looking at it the entire time was effectively the number 10 overall pick for the Rockets is Kevin Durant. Like it amounts to that. And so there's that. And then of course Dallas picks up Cooper Flag and Dylan Harper goes to San Antonio. And now you look at it, and if you're an NBA fan in the state of Texas, even if you're not a fan of one of the NBA teams in the state of Texas, and I'm assuming that more likely than not, you are a fan of one of the NBA teams if you live in one of those cities or from one of those cities. But even if you're not even a fan of one of those 3 teams, the Rockets, the Mavs, the Spurs, you now have an opportunity. If you're just an NBA fan, you want to watch NBA games, say you have another team, a favorite team that's outside of the city or outside of the state. And like if you're just an NBA fan in the state of Texas, you now have an opportunity to watch generational greatness from any of the 3 teams in the state. Whether you're talking about watching Kevin Durant with the Rockets in Houston, watching Cooper Flag and how the number 1 overall pick develops with the Dallas Mavericks, or the fact that Victor Wembanyama is expected to come back and he's with the Spurs, and now he's got a gang of talent around him. Not necessarily generational talents, but he's the generational talent with a lot of pretty damn good talent around him. If you're an NBA fan in the state of Texas, you've got an opportunity to watch some really, really good basketball, no matter which city you go to, no matter which of the 3 cities that have NBA teams that you go to. And that's pretty cool. Like this is about as cool as it's been. It's a shame. Yeah, it's funny that I'd mentioned Kyrie Irving, when we're talking about You got Kevin Durant and Cooper Flag, but like Kyrie Irving is somebody that's like an afterthought right now because he's injured. But you could watch, in theory, I know he's signing a new deal. You could watch Kyrie Irving and Cooper Flag. And we talked about this on the podcast already, how it's just a shame that the Mavs got bailed out for making such a terrible decision, and now they get to be cool again, despite the fact that they tried their best not to be. But yeah, man, I think every NBA fan in the state of Texas should be excited for these reasons. Now, before I get into any more of my NBA draft thoughts, I do want to take a quick detour because a couple of things. I got a couple of gripes with the broadcast. First of all, I'll point out that I did not realize at first that there were two different broadcasts that Disney, let's say Disney, was doing. You had an ABC broadcast that had Stephen A. and Bob Myers on it, and then you had the ESPN broadcast that had Malika Andrews, it had Kendrick Perkins, it had Jay Billis and Andrea Carter, I think is her name. Does really good work in the women's game, and is just overall a smart basketball person. Um, and I feel like she's done some reporting in other sports as well, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, so two different broadcasts. Didn't realize that as I'm navigating it. I drop out and drop back in. I started on the ESPN broadcast, but then ended up on the ABC broadcast and confused. Didn't realize that I'd done that and thought, well, did they switch teams or like broadcasting teams or whatever? Like did like they hand it over or what exactly happened? And then I realized I'm kind of online as well. Then I kind of realized, oh, there's two different broadcasts. I just didn't realize that I had gone from ESPN to ABC. I kind of looked on my guide, looked for a draft, and went to the first thing that I saw. I wasn't really thinking about what I was going to. So I didn't realize that they were doing two different broadcasts. Okay, sure. I understand that. I think it was clear Stephen A. and Bob Myers were meant to be the ones that could speak to the more casual fan on ABC. And they wanted to have Jay Billis and a host of, Kendrick Perkins and a host of basketball experts on the ESPN broadcast for more specific sports fans. I thought, as I was observing that, I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. This is kind of this is how you would do logically how you would do an NBA draft simulcast. But the problem was, and I know a lot of people give Stephen A. lot of flack, and I think some of it and a great deal of it is fair. The issue with this was clearly the production on the basketball expert side. Like, and I hate to do this because Kendrick Perkins is a local dude, Beaumont Ozan, and lives in Houston, and I'm actually, for the most part, like generally proud of what Kendrick Perkins has done, just as somebody that's that comes from the crib. But man, they had them up there where like he wasn't really paying attention to like the trades that were happening, and he was getting confused by the hats, which is his own thing. I know Scott Van Pelt complained about that after the draft about hey, we got to fix this thing with the hats. I don't understand why the NBA doesn't do this properly. But it is kind of the job of the broadcaster to be keeping up with that sort of thing, to know, even if you see the hat or even if you see the icon, that the information has just been relayed to you that this pick is going. And he was just breaking down players for teams that they weren't going to, man, after the the news had been delivered right then and there on their broadcast, and certainly relayed to him in some kind of capacity through production. So I was just like, man, that's rough. That's really, really rough. And then y'all saw the moment, and I forwarded this to a friend who refused to watch it because they didn't want to experience the secondhand embarrassment But I was watching this live when Malik Andrews called the one young man Colin Coward, and what was his real what was his real name? It wasn't Colin Coward, man. It was something close to that. But and she was, oh my god, hey, Cedric Coward, yeah, Cedric Coward, who was actually drafted by Memphis. It was the Portland pick that went to Memphis, 11th overall, number 11 overall pick. Cedric Coward, as she called him, Colin Coward. Like I'm not. I don't want to do this thing like where I'm trying to like embarrass anybody. Because I imagine, and credit to her for like I feel like she held up. You know, if I had done that on the NBA draft, bro, like I don't know if I would have been able to hold it together. Like if there was more show to do, and I had done that, I don't know how well I would have been able to hold it together. And I thought she did a tremendous job of like just just continuing to do her job. You know, so good for her. But I mean, like that I- overall, I think just indicative of how bad their NBA coverage is on television. Like I think they've got good NBA people, like media people, insiders and writers and thinkers that work for ESPN. But for whatever reason, it does not translate in production and in TV production value. Like it just does not. It was such a bad show. I hate to say that. I do. Like cuz and it's the reason why I mentioned this at the top and kind of wanted to even avoid it, but I couldn't, man, because it stood out that much that as a person that works in big box media, but not as a media critic, I don't always feel comfortable making public media criticisms. But unless they're like egregious and we got to set it up, we got to like set the record straight on something. But like something like this, I wouldn't normally really want to talk about. But this was so bad, so bad. Colin Coward, and I forget how many players it was that were or Perk was up there telling you about how great of a fit they was going to be for this team, and that's not the team that it was going to. And to Scott Van Pelt's point, man, they need to just fix the deal with the hats. That could probably help a lot of those issues, I think. So, uh, so yeah, there was that. Now, I do want to say before I wrap up this draft stuff that the Ace Bailey and Walter Clayton thing in Utah that caught my attention. That caught my attention. I'm not ready to like hot take predict that that's the next young core of players. Like you get them and Laurie Markkinen, who's under contract for what the next how many 4 seasons? How many seasons does Larry Markkinen have on his contract? At least another 3 or 4 seasons. You get them together and you're just taking off and it's the next big thing. I'm not predicting that yet, but I do want to say right here, right now, that caught my attention. That what the Utah Jazz did, and y'all know how I am. You know, Rockets fan, grew up in the '90s, and in the just in the prime hate the Jazz years or my coming of age years as a basketball fan. I do not like them, even though it's been years since it's felt like that. Like like there was even a need for for those two teams to have any kind of static or rivalry. Like that's steep built in. I don't like to give the Jazz credit for nothing, but I think Ace Bailey and Walter Clayton Jr. Like in Ace Bailey, you get arguably the best pure scorer in the draft. and you get him at 5. And I know he was an interesting topic going into the draft because it's like, why this dude ain't working out? Who does he think he is? And he ends up being a top 5 pick, and it's because he is who we think he is. He's a top 5 pick. Well, if you're the best pure scorer, potentially the best pure scorer in the draft, and that's what Ace Bailey is. What earlier when I talked about obvious NBA players, obvious NBA talent, I think Cooper Flagg as the number 1 overall pick is especially as young as he is. But after Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey's got a case for being the most obvious NBA player. I think Dylan Harper's are pretty obvious. I think all of them are. But Ace Bailey as the best scorer, and then Walter Clayton Jr. to me as I guess in today's game you would call him a combo guard, 6'3", can score, but it's clearly going to be like I'm interested to see based off of how well he played. He looked like, I would say to me also an obvious NBA player. Now, not necessarily like super high ceiling NBA player, but you watch him in the NCAA tournament and you're like, oh no, that's an obvious NBA player too. Walter Clayton Jr. and Ace Bailey as pieces and potentially better than pieces to go with Larry Markkinen with Utah. That is a team that was terribly uninteresting 24 hours ago or just an hour before the draft. Like within an hour became a much more interesting team, if not this season, like in the coming seasons, like maybe the season after this one, season after that. But certainly even now, like I think that those guys are going to play and they're going to be a league pass team. One of the league pass teams, one of the teams that's not going to really matter in the grand scheme of things quite yet, but is one to keep an eye on. So that definitely caught my attention at the NBA draft. All right, now let's jump over to, since I spent 20 minutes on the draft, should jump over to this Fred VanVleet news. 2 years, $50 million. I think this is a win-win. And really like an obvious writing on the wall kind of move, at least them agreeing to an extension. But from the Rockets standpoint, it's clear and obvious. To me, it's going to allow the Rockets to get a much better version of Fred VanVleet. And here's what I mean. Like, I think between bringing in Kevin Durant and then doing this extension where instead of paying him the 40 whatever million it is, you're going to pay him 20 something million. And so it's not half the salary, but something like that. And you're going to pay him far less, but guarantee him much more, but then also require him to do much less because you brought in Kevin Durant. Does that make sense? So you're getting the same player at half the price, but just a longer commitment, all while lessening the role or lessening, hopefully, the dependence on him. Between bringing in Kevin Durant and, of course, Reed Shepard's still on the team, and you're expecting a jump and an increased role for him. I think this just makes sense, makes a lot of sense for the Rockets from that standpoint. And then for Fred, I mean, it also makes sense in the standpoint that, like, he didn't have no guaranteed deal going into this year, So you go from 40 something million unguaranteed to 50 million guaranteed over the next 2 years. I mean, that's a win. He just cashed in on $50 million. And then that's whether he opts into his deal next year or not, And I don't have to mansplain this to anybody. Like, he was on a team option. Now he has a guaranteed year and a player option. For a player option is better than a team option, clearly. So, I mean, that's a clear and obvious win for him. So I think this was the move, and now, and I think I touched on this, but like now that's what I look forward to. I was doing the drive on Wednesday with Ron Hughley and Clint Sterner, and shout out to Foolish Club Media, shout out to Sports Radio 610. But Ron asked me, what is your biggest concern with this Kevin Durant trade? Because like Ron's been on it, I've been on it. We're in support of. We're fans of. We're in favor of, both of us. Pretty big advocates of this Kevin Durant trade. But he did ask me to play, I guess, to play devil's advocate. He did ask me, "What's your biggest concern?" And I had to think about it on the fly because I hadn't really thought about. I'd spent so much time shooting down everybody else's concern. That's what we did on the live stream last week, and I appreciate everybody that joined in or even went back to check that out. And if you haven't, you still can. It's on the B Block Podcast YouTube page and on the podcast page as well. But when I thought about it, I was like, the downside of this would be if somehow tragically they over relied, if the Rockets over relied on Kevin Durant the way that they over relied on Fred VanVleet. And that was by necessity, to be clear. Like, I'm not criticizing them for how much they over relied on Fred VanVleet. I think the hope was that he would be able to share some of the burden, share some of the load with another guard or two on the team. And it just, sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And when it didn't, Fred has the sort of the confidence and the wherewithal to go out there and get it, you know, to like, I think it's kind of just being around him a little bit. I think it is, and also observing how he plays and how he moves. It's dope how differently he views himself versus how fans and others view him. Like, just watching him out there, 6 foot, not, especially quick or athletic, can shoot a little bit, but sometimes streaky. Like, folks are so unimpressed. And Fred VanVleet has the confidence of of a superstar. And I actually respect it even when it's frustrating to watch at times. I like, it's one of those things that I'm kind of willing to live with. And I think he showed in game 5 and game 6 of the first round to keep them in that series of why they believe in him so much, why he believes in himself so much, and why he continues to cash in on these deals. So I know a lot of people were like disappointed that Fred was brought back, but he was always going to be brought back. Like, hopefully you were preparing yourself for that disappointment if you were disappointed. I am not, to be clear. I think this is the move. I think that Fred, especially now playing alongside Kevin Durant, is going to be in a more suited role as the guy that, again, I mentioned this in the last show. He's going to have that heat check. That heat check's coming. But I don't think he's going to feel the need to carry them or take over a game, because they'll have a guy that more than likely can do that. Now, I am curious what exactly is next. Like, that to me, like, the Rockets are going to have to figure out what else they're going to do with the contracts that they got, the optional contracts that they got, the non-guaranteed, 8 million roughly non-guaranteed to Jock Landale, something close to just under 5 million for Aaron Holiday. Like, if they're not going to do that, what are they going to do with that money? To me, is the curious point, and something that I'm still watching for as the offseason unfolds. Somebody asked me about a Kevin Durant press conference. The league year doesn't start until the 6th, till July 6th. So I doubt it'd be before that. It's gonna be sometime after that. And just kind of stay tuned. But yeah, no, I think I think this is perfect. This is going to allow for a better version of Fred VanVleet because and not this is not about being in his pockets per se, but it matters that he's gonna make a lesser clip and it's gonna allow you to do more things and he's gonna be playing alongside Kevin Durant and won't be required to do more than what seems like should be required of him. I think it's great for them. Like I mentioned, the biggest and a parallel that I draw with the Kevin Durant thing is like the biggest concern with Kevin Durant is that they rely on him more than it feels like they should, the way that they had to with Fred VanVleet. And that would be only because, let's say, Amin Thompson doesn't take that leap that everybody's expecting. Let's say Albert Shingun takes a step back or knock on wood gets injured or something like that, right? Like if it becomes, if for whatever reason they become more like the Suns and the Rockets, that was a lot of part of my argument, right? Like don't compare this to his experience with the Suns because these ain't the Suns, right? Don't compare this to his experience with the Nets because for one, that almost worked, but also this ain't nothing like what was going on with the Nets. But something goofy happens, and the Rockets got to rely on Kevin Durant in a real way, in the way that they've had to with Fred VanVleet. And in both years, there have been times when they've had to go without him and then be exposed for how badly they really need him. That would be my concern. But I am glad to see Fred back. Despite some of those rough nights when you're like wanting Fred to shoot less, but then it's like, no, 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 yes, 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 yes. There he goes. He's going off for, he's saving you in the playoffs. He's giving you a chance, a fighting chance to go to a game 7. Shout out to Fred VanVleet. Okay, last thing. The Texans announced their training camp dates and times. This is relevant, obviously, to me because I'm going to be at a lot of these. I'm not going to be at all of them, but I'm going to be at a lot of them. And of course, once that time comes, there's going to be a lot of talk about the Texans on this podcast. I don't know if we'll increase scheduling or do more shows, but we'll certainly do a lot of Texans when that time comes. So I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of set the stage here. They are gonna start training camp on July 23rd. That's a Wednesday. I'm gonna start with a early press conference with Nick Caserio, and then they get started at 9 o'clock. Most of these practices, with just a couple of exceptions, start at 9 a.m. Okay, 9 a.m. Central Time, of course. Now they've got, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 practices, it looks like, that are going to be available to the public, if I'm counting that correctly. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, seven practices available to the public. Okay, the first of which will be on a Saturday, July 26th at 9 a.m. It's at NRG, the Houston Methodist Training Center. So where that bubble is, right across from NRG. We've got the first. Well, what I wanted to point out was the open practice. Okay, so we know that they're going to the Greenbrier. I should probably mention that they're going to go to the Greenbrier in West Virginia, which they haven't done. I think the last time they did that would have been 2018, and so they've done that before. It's been a while since they've done that. I don't anticipate that I'll be going to the Greenbrier. Just kind of looking at the dates, does not look like it's gonna be for me, but that'll be exciting. Before that, though, there will be 6 practices that y'all will get to see before they get out there. So that's 1, 2, 3, 6 practices before they travel out to and you'll get to watch them the morning of them traveling. So like they're gonna leave on August 2nd. That's a Saturday. But practice that morning and then leave after that to head to West Virginia to practice the next week. Now, the last practice that's available to the public is going to be the joint practice with the Panthers. So that's to me noteworthy that the joint practice with the Panthers, C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, um, practicing in front of folks on a Thursday, August 14th. So, and that will be the seventh and final practice that is available to the public. If I'm reading this note right, that the Texans sent over yesterday, that they sent over on Wednesday. So, um, yeah. So that's those are the dates. Exciting times. Going to be exciting times. At least I mentioned that because, of course, I work at the flagship radio station where, we're going to be all over this. I won't be at the Greenbrier more than likely, but and I have not talked about this with the bosses yet, but I imagine that somebody will, possibly, hopefully, we'll see. But even if not, of course, we'll be locked in. If we're not there, we will literally know everybody who is. So I'll say this though, before we get out of here, that I think to me, so talking about training camp days, I think the biggest training camp storyline that I can put a finger on right now is not just the offensive line, because that's been the topic for the longest and remains the topic. I'm not one of those people that gets tired of a topic if well, and not that I don't get tired of it, but I acknowledge if it remains a topic for however long it remains a topic, it's a topic. So I know a lot of people get like fatigue, beat a dead horse, but the offensive line is the topic, right? But specifically now with the Texans, it's the tackle position, and like I was just fascinated with how it seemed like the Texans were, it seems like based on watching them in OTAs and minicamp, that they're set on the interior, which is the spots where it felt like they had the most questions, where they had more questions, right? It feel like to me, it felt like the Texans had more questions from guard to guard, and somehow they more quickly found the answers than they did at tackle, where they had fewer questions. Now, once they traded Laramie Tunsil and decided that Titus Howard was going to be better suited at guard and that he was one of their answers on the interior, then that obviously did create new questions at tackle. Um, and did, of course, address one of, at least to them, one of the issues on the interior with the right guard situation in Titus Howard. But, that was the vibe to me from OTAs and minicamp that, is it going to be that way in training camp as well, where like it looks like the battle is more so at tackle? And if so, like, what does that competition look like? I'm not convinced that either guy that's penciled in right now, Cam Robinson at left tackle or Blake Fisher at right tackle, I'm not convinced that either one of them is for sure going to be that guy, and maybe I shouldn't be convinced about any of these spots, but watching Laken Tomlinson and Jake Andrews and Titus Howard take so many of the reps, the first team reps, I should say, at OTAs and minicamp was pretty convincing. I'm not really sure exactly if it's going to be the same thing for the tackle situation. Like, and here's what I mean. The rookie Ariante Ursery, he seems like he could push either one of those spots for left or right tackle. They really like him. And if he comes along, and we'll see what his training camp looks like, but if he comes along, he's an option at either one of those positions. Also, Trent Brown, I would mention, like, depending on what his health looks like, and that's going to be a thing for me, like a side note for me at training camp, like what's Trent Brown doing? Because they said he'd be ready for training camp. Like he's got a pretty serious injury that he's recovering from. Depending on what his health looks like, he could be your right tackle. So basically, with the tackles, you can't really tell the starters from the reserves or really identify who is who. Other than the fact that you got Ursery and Trent Brown both as behemoths, standing out as behemoths. So that's what I'm looking out for at training camp, and a host of other things that we'll get to. Like I mentioned, we're just about a month out. They're going to start on July 23rd, Wednesday, 9 o'clock. First practice that's available to the public will be that Saturday, July 26th. So we'll do a lot. Like we're trying to hit on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the schedule's been wonky. And so sometimes we hit on a Tuesday and Thursday, but sometimes we'll get you late on a Thursday or get you on the win. We're going to do a better job of being more consistent with publishing, but even that could change with, me trying the live stream and us having training camp. Like we might do some training camp live streams at night, like depending on how things go. So just kind of stick around for that. Like I would say, following us on social media. I've tried to expand the B Block podcast sort of social media portfolio, if you will. So now you can actually get us on Twitter, whatever it is we call that, Instagram at B Block Podcast. We're also on TikTok now. So like wherever it is that you're doing your socials, you should be able to find us. So make sure that you do that. Also, like for sure, subscribe, rate, review, tell people about the podcast. Make sure you also check out Foolish Club Media as well. But yeah, man, check us out on social media and figure out exactly how things are changing. Like I mentioned, everything is fluid, but we're really excited about training camp around here and can't wait to talk to you about it. All right, man. Look, until next time, y'all be good.
Riding clean, looking fly, H-Town till he die. Swinging down West Time, I throw the deuces in the sky. Sam Houston represent, you other cats irrelevant. He be at the press conference, getting all the questions in. 6'10 represent, you know how he do it. Beast guy from Hiram Clark, do it. Beast guy from Hiram Clark, 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 Beast guy from Hiram Clark.